Hey everybody, how is it going today? We got a few great folks in the Bitcoin space today. We've got Roberto Rios. Roberto, you are quite knowledgeable about all things macro in the last space we had. You were delivering some killer insights. Simply Bitcoin. Most of you guys know Nico from Simply Bitcoin. Huge shout out to Nico for coming on. And Kyle. Kyle is a killer in Bitcoin video production and has seen a lot of crazy developments up close in the Bitcoin grassroots space. So this is a great panel. We kind of have folks from all different corners of the Bitcoin sphere. And today we are going to talk about why don't new Bitcoiners want to self-custody their Bitcoin. I think there's a few great ways we can start with this. First off, self-custodying the Bitcoin. What are the other options? Why don't new Bitcoiners or even all Bitcoiners that are not currently self-custodying, why don't they want to self-custody yet?
I also had some stats I looked up just to look at the actual numbers. So roughly 75% of all Bitcoin transactions never touch the blockchain. So they're happening entirely off-chain or just within exchanges. Even for genuine on-chain movement, 80% of volume is done from exchanges, either to other exchanges or just within their own databases. And then the Coinbase monopoly, like 33% of all Bitcoin is held in Coinbase, self-custody, or rather non-self-custody within Coinbase's custody. So the numbers are kind of depressing from that angle. I wanted to come from the negative side so we could kind of talk about that. Like, what are we doing wrong? Or just, is this something that we're just going to be struggling with, continuously in Bitcoin? I'm curious to get everyone's thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers aren't great. I know that like roughly 12 to 15% of new Bitcoiners self-custody. The vast majority just keep it on centralized exchanges. I know several new Bitcoiners myself personally who don't have it in self-custody and instead want to store it on Coinbase. My brother being one of them. Even though he runs a Bitcoin miner, he just wants the funds sent from the pool mining to his Coinbase wallet. And I've tried to tell him, like, you're getting non-KYC Bitcoin via mining. Why would you want to taint that with the problems of centralized exchanges? But I think fundamentally it comes down to two things. The first is an understanding issue, right? Most people, especially brand new entrants to the Bitcoin space, don't understand the importance and the use case of self-custody. They don't know why they should care. They don't know exactly what privacy money or non-censorship enabled currency means for them, and how it can help liberate their lives from the tyranny of fiat enslavement. And the second thing is convenience, right? Like it's extra steps to buy a hardware wallet, to connect it to a computer. Usually you have to download an app. I used to have a Ledger. You had to download Ledger Live in order to have it function properly. And then every single transaction, you have to like sign every transaction with the hardware wallet. You have to set it up either with a Bluetooth handshake or with a cable to the computer. And then you have to store the wallet somewhere that's secure, and you have to usually store the backup seed phrase either with the wallet or somewhere else. And so that's like a lot of steps that for most people who want just convenience and ease, especially in this digital age, that's just too big of a roadblock for them. And so they rule off self-custodying altogether because they just think, hey man, like this is so much of a hassle. I'd rather just buy it on Coinbase and leave it there and they can worry about it. So yeah, I think those are the two main issues. But it's really sad because, like, I mean, dude, 88% of them not self-custodying. That shows that fundamentally, I think we're failing on the education front, especially for new users.
Gosh, Roberto, so many interesting points there. The anecdote of your brother mining Bitcoin, which for anyone who's not familiar, yeah, that Bitcoin is non-KYC Bitcoin. It's issued straight from the protocol, and then he's putting it right into Coinbase. It kind of makes me think, like, it also makes me want to zoom back. Like, why are people buying Bitcoin, like, in the first place? Like, to you, Roberto, you're kind of, correctly, I would argue, pointing out that non-KYC Bitcoin is like, like the non-KYC component is valuable in and of itself. And then by attaching a KYC profile to it, you're arguably diminishing the potential usefulness, or at least you could say uniqueness of that Bitcoin. So, like, why are people, I guess this might be overly generalized, but like, why are people buying Bitcoin in the first place? Like, I think some folks are maybe not caring about the non-KYC aspect. And And I think maybe some folks why do people seem to be so okay with, KYC to everything, government control? Like, does that convenience at some point not, bear like an excessive cost? Like the convenience factor must be outweighed at some point by the risk of seizure or some sort of overreach.
Yeah, Conrad, I think, can you hear me? Yeah, I think we get into Bitcoin because of greed or need, right? Maybe Nico came up with this. And in the West, right, our financial system is so solid that we just take for granted that we can trust our wealth with and our payments with centralized custodians. So to me, it's like it's an education thing. Most people just don't know that that this risk exists. Um, and secondly, I don't think we need more than 12% of self-custody Bitcoin. Like you guys are kind of framing this as like, oh, it's a negative thing. Like I think 12% is going to be as high as it ever gets. Like we're only going lower like as we progress here. And I think that's okay. If you look at like the American Revolution, right? 3% of the population, maybe 5, led the entire revolution. So I don't necessarily think we need or we should even see it as a failure. I actually think it's more of just like, this is a natural way that humans are. Like 88% of people just don't want to have any responsibility or accountability. They just want someone else to do it. So that's kind of how I see it. I almost just kind of embrace it. It's like, yeah, the people that are willing to hear the message. And as you go down the rabbit hole, obviously, like you learn more. I don't know what you guys think and what your experiences were, but for me, I was in Bitcoin and studying it, passionate about it for at least a year, maybe more before ever even getting a hardware wallet. So I think it's just meeting people where they're at and kind of accepting that it's just most people aren't that way.
My concern, though, if that's the case, is 88% of people are going to be continually just buying Bitcoin and leaving on exchange. What's going to stop this, in the end game from just being another rehypothecation, over collateralization game? Like, who's to stop Coinbase or BlackRock or whoever from telling everyone that they have Bitcoin when they buy it via an exchange and store there, and then not actually have it? Right? That kind of obviates the initial use case of Bitcoin as hard money.
That's a great point. I've heard people make the claim that it might be that self-custody Bitcoin would have a premium in the future too. Like I can prove that I actually own my Bitcoin is worth a lot more than someone that supposedly holds my Bitcoin that might be partial paper Bitcoin. Like, is there a future where there is like different? I mean, they can't prove that they have Bitcoin if they don't actually have it. But is there a point where the cost basis changes completely for different kinds of Bitcoin?
Isn't that already kind of happening with gold? I'm not currently purchasing gold myself, but I've been hearing anecdotally from Bitcoiners that are also gold investors that they believe that paper gold price is heavily suppressed, and if you're purchasing coins or bars or anything like that on the market, you're looking at a much higher rate. So that's an interesting point about. I could see that happening with Bitcoin at some point, especially the non-KYC Bitcoin. I've heard some people even in present day paying a premium for freshly mined Bitcoin, like a virgin Bitcoin. I've heard that term before, which is pretty interesting. On the greed or need, Kyle, I really like that that point on the greed or need. I think it also rhymes, so it's like more true. But for myself, I'm a Canadian. Born into a privileged financial system, so I approached Bitcoin from essentially the greed perspective. Bitcoin and crypto when I first learned about it in 2017. I was like, great, stocks I trade 24/7. This is exactly what my overstimulated brain needs, and I was very excited from that perspective. And coincidentally, I was working as a bank teller in a branch, and I was enthusiastically telling everyone about Bitcoin, which was probably not a great sign, but I think pointed to my future love for Bitcoin. And I found most people were actually not super interested in it. This was 2017, mid 2017, so I think before it really started to kind of get wrapped up in that media hype at the end of that year. And to my surprise, even the people my age, the people in their 20s and 30s, weren't interested in Bitcoin, which I was really shocked by. I thought, sure, maybe the Gen Xers and the Boomers might not be interested because it's technology, it's new. But I was shocked when the younger people were also not interested in it. To my surprise, and this is where I think the greed or need saying it I really like it. I was speaking with some folks that were in their 90s. This was like they were from the silent generation. They were extremely old, and they had old money habits. They would always withdraw all their money from the bank, never keep a single penny in the bank, which was kind of odd behavior. But I just chalked that up as them being old. But then when I talked to them about Bitcoin, they expressed this huge interest and appreciation for money that wasn't controlled by banks or the government because they had lived through the Great Depression and they saw that whole collapse happening in real time. It led them to be scarred financially. So they never trusted the banks. They were cash into the mattress folks their whole lives. So, and I think, we as like, as Canadians or Americans or like Westerners, we sometimes hear this from Bitcoiners that are maybe have a background in a communist country or a Latin American country where they've experienced, recent monetary, it's just like high monetary inflation. And yeah, that greed or need aspect is so interesting. I think maybe the need folks might be a little bit more willing to kind of understand that, hey, self-custodying here is a value. How do we like bridge that gap for the folks that might be approaching it from the other angle, like kind of like the greed kind of angle, which, not to criticize any of the folks that haven't gone to Bitcoin due to like being financially disprivileged. It's more, how do we trigger that mindset into realizing the need to self-custody now to help them in preventative so that they don't approach it from a need perspective later? How do we get through to those folks?
Yo! What's up, everybody?
Hey, Nico.
Yeah. Happy to be here. It's a Tuesday, I think. I'm on the road, but it's always a good time with the Bitcoin Well folks, and it's great to see you. Great to see you. I mean, great to be on this panel with you, Peruvian Bull. Yeah, so like let's break it down for a second. Let's zoom out, right? So like back in January of 2024, it was the launch of the spot Bitcoin ETF, right? And for the first time in Bitcoin's history, we actually saw the amount of people taking custody of their Bitcoin go down. That never happened before in Bitcoin's history. Every single cycle, you saw more people taking self custody of their Bitcoin. So, to answer one of the initial questions, it's like, why is this phenomenon happening? Well, the phenomenon is happening because of convenience, right? Like a lot of people, you pitch them the idea of Bitcoin, and before they had the option, they're like, okay, do I leave my Bitcoin on this sketchy exchange that has absolutely no regulations, or do I take self-custody of my Bitcoin? Now they have the option of like, oh, wait, I could just buy the BlackRock ETF. Like, they're not going to rug me until 6102 order 2.0 comes around, but they don't even know that. So, like, how do we move the cultural needle to self-custody? I think that's the big question, right? That's the elephant in the room that we have to address. Honestly, making content in the space for almost a decade now, what I've come to realize is that this is going to be a multi-generational shift. And I'll give a little bit more context and details on what I mean by that. So we had this utopian vision of what Bitcoin was pre the launch of the ETF, right? We were all on the same mission. It was, Bitcoin or slavery, not your keys, not your cheese, fix the money, fix the world. And we were all on that same bus, right? When the ETF launched, a lot of the incentives got a little bit misaligned, right? Like you saw the rise of, the paper Bitcoiners, of the suit coiners, right? There's so many names, for the people that are going into Bitcoin for the number go up technology, but aren't necessarily coming into Bitcoin for the freedom go up technology. So how do we change that? Well, we change that by changing the culture. And that's something that's going to take time. And that's something that you have to continuously chip at over a long period of time. And then it becomes a multi-generational discussion. So what do I mean by that? So my daughter is born into a world where she's going to be Bitcoin native, very similar to a lot of us millennials, where we grew up in a world where the internet existed. Like there's some people, not everyone, that still don't know how to use the internet. Why? Because they weren't born into the world where using the internet was necessary. They weren't born into the world where they're growing up with the internet, right? So now it's like kind of like this generational shift where I know for a fact that my kids are going to be hardcore Bitcoiners. And for them, the whole idea of going into a branch and opening up a bank account, it's like literally a 2-hour process where they literally put a probe up your ass and they ask you all these fucking crazy questions. Like, I know for a fact that my daughter's going to be like, wait, so I'm just going to download a wallet and I could receive money and I could send all that money. I could send that money anywhere around the world instantaneously. And the very idea of, storing your keys, or, there's other solutions like BitKey, for example, that is seedless. There's going to be even better solutions a decade from now, right? So what we have to do as a community is to continue to beat the battle drum to move that cultural needle for worldwide Bitcoin adoption. And you do this on multiple fronts. Obviously, media, me and Peruvian Bull, right? We make media, right? You guys over at Bitcoin Well, you guys do such a great job, again, beating the battle drum of like, look, automatic self-custody. You, Kyle, right? Making content as well. So it's this kind of collaborative, decentralized movement that we're all pushing forward so that we can finally breach into the mainstream cultural zeitgeist, because that's what we haven't been able to do as a community. And that's something that just takes time, right? You want more people that are mainstream, that absolutely have nothing to do with the community, that are talking about the benefits of Bitcoin and self-custody. I think that movement is going to really take off initially in the global south, where a lot of these people don't have the benefits of us in the West, where we have relatively stable fiat currencies, so that we don't necessarily notice that we're getting stolen from, right? But if you talk to someone in the global south and you pitch them on Bitcoin, like, you don't even need to convince them. They're like, how do I sign up for this? This sounds like a fantastic idea. Or anybody that's experienced some type of capital controls or some type of persecution because of their political beliefs, right? They're going to be like, yo, are you trying to tell me that there's a non-sovereign alternative that's censorship resistant, that I don't have to ask anybody for permission to use? Where the F do I sign up, right? So it's like a multifaceted thing, right? It's moving the cultural needle through media, through content, through music, through art, all of that stuff. And then again, let the generations play out, right? Because that there's a whole lot of people, and I know a couple of them that are older, that despite them having an iPhone, despite them, trying their best to like move with the times, they still don't fundamentally understand the internet because they didn't grow up with that, right? So I'm extremely bullish, no pun intended, Peruvian Bull. I'm extremely bullish on the next generations and the next generations of kids who come from Bitcoiners, right? This is why, listen, it's not only about, stacking sats and making a great life for your family and your future generations, but it's also about literally like, how do we outbreed the fiat maxis? And you could already see this in Bitcoin culture. Bitcoiners already have more kids than people that are in the traditional fiat system. Why are they having more kids? They're having more kids because they actually feel like they have hope for the future, right? Which fiat absolutely steals from you. It gets you into this nihilistic mindset where you're like, oh, I'm going to have kids later because I can't afford anything. Like, if you switch to a Bitcoiner mindset, it's not a question of like, will I be able to afford this thing? It's a question of, how long do I have to hold on to my stack in order to afford that thing, right? So it's a much more optimistic mindset versus this nihilistic mindset that 99% of the world is operating on. So again, I think it's going to be a multi-generational effort of moving that cultural needle. And I think that once we get to that breaking point, that I would say it's around 3 to 7%, I think it's just going to start to snowball from there, right? Ultimately, this is the separation of money and state, ladies and gentlemen. This is not going to be a quick process. We're going to have a lot of bumps along the road. There's going to be a lot of us are going to be persecuted. I mean, you guys experienced some of this in Canada, right? With the Canadian truckers protest, right? We saw a lot of this stuff, right? So this is going to be a multi-generational cultural movement. And I think Bitcoin in and of itself, what people have to understand, that this isn't just a financial innovation. Ultimately, Bitcoin is a revolution, right? So anyways, we're going to keep chipping at it. We're going to keep hosting spaces like this. And then if enough of us take self-custody, we win, and there's absolutely nothing they could do about it. And happy to be here, guys. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you, Nico. I just want to follow up real quick because I love that framing that is 100% multi-generational. Like I'm also an anarchist, which is how I got into Bitcoin, because I was like, oh, this is like anarchy money. And I didn't really know a lot about money or the Fed at the time and learned so much through that process. But like I'm also a peaceful parent, and that's not just because I don't think it's right to like spank your kids or hit your kids, but because I believe that the only way to get to a world without government and abuse is to start, in your home with your kids, treating them correctly, where they don't think that violence from authority is legitimate. So I think framing it in that mindset really helps, like when you see numbers like that, or when you're at it, like Nico, 10 years in the space, like, dude, that's amazing. Like I've been learning through that time, but not spreading the message. So that's amazing on you. And it's like when you frame it from that mindset of like, this is going to take time, like I may not see the end goal, but I know that my kids or their kids, are going to possibly see this world where we have no government, or at least less government, or a world where people use sound money. Like that's amazing to motivate you to keep going on, even when, it feels like no one's self-custodying or no one even understands Bitcoin. So what's the point? But yeah, thank you, Nico, for that. That was great.
Yeah, I did. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and the truckers. Sorry, Kyle. Nico mentioned something about the Canadian truckers protest. For anyone who might not be too familiar, it was around the end of COVID. During I think it was 2022. Many Canadian truckers were organizing and protesting by like parking their trucks and making themselves heard to show that they were like displeased with a lot of the COVID regulations and whatnot. And as these folks were essentially striking, people were, citizens from all over, mainly Canadians, were donating money just that these guys could like afford lunches, and organizers could distribute like lunch bags basically for folks. And anyone who was contributing to this ended up having their bank account shut down completely because the truckers' protest was deemed, it was like a terrorist organization or something on some sort of like high up criminal level, such that giving them money deemed like the government was like, okay, now we're shutting down your bank account. And a lot of people that I've spoken with that, if you talk to them, they don't necessarily come off as like the Bitcoin demographic, but because they were affected by the situation, they realize, oh wait, like I'm not as, like I'm being a little bit explicit here, but they're not being as financially, they're not as financially privileged as they would have once thought, right? Like no one said those exact words, but like they realize that, oh wait, our financial system is a lot more fragile and not as free as I once thought it was. I thought my money was once my money. Not only am I not able to withdraw, a few $1,000s in the bank without getting harassed, but now if I even people that are donating $25 to the truckers protests, were having their entire bank account shut down. So that was a big movement that we saw there. And yeah, so I think that was a really interesting time where as people kind of learn about why the current financial system is flawed and not working against them, they're going to move to Bitcoin. I'm kind of trying to think of, Nico, you're talking about Bitcoin's culture. I'm trying to almost visualize the culture as like a price chart. And it's kind of like, I would say, steadily increasing and up and to the right. But every now and then we get these like jumps in the price or in the culture or in the sentiment or appreciation of Bitcoin, because something like Mt. Gox will collapse, the Canadian truckers protests will occur. And people that once felt very comfortable with their banking system and even their governments will all of a sudden start to question the safety of their financial assets and essentially their family's future. Because that's our money is our future. It's like how we, I spend, therefore I am, is basically the present economy. So if you can't spend your money, then how are you able to express your will, your individuality, and secure your future? So that's when I think people start to think a little bit more seriously about their Bitcoin. I'd love to hear if anyone would, even in the audience, if anyone was, introduced to Bitcoin through the truckers protest or some kind of, negative or malicious event in their financial situation where there was like you were not able to leave the country with your assets or anything like that. So if anyone experienced this kind of a financial seizure and that brought them to Bitcoin, I'd love to hear your story. But yeah, that was just a little tidbit background on the Canadian Truckers protest, which definitely brought us a lot of new Bitcoiners to our team.
Yeah, well, we get someone from the audience up here to share. Let me just kind of build on what you guys are talking about. Pain is the best teacher, definitely. So we learn through pain. The beauty of content and what Niko's been doing and what everyone here has been doing is that we can learn through other people's pain. So if anyone's interested, I just posted one of my favorite podcasts. Guy Swan actually read this article. It's called The Great Taking. And it's one of these ones where it's like you just want to share it with everybody. So I just posted it on my Twitter if anyone wants to check that out if you haven't heard it. It's like a 4-part series. And I think it's a really good one to share with people who don't understand custodial risk. People like my parents that just have always trusted the banks and their retirement accounts are safe. And I'm coming in saying, hey, your whole account could get rugged. Like that's a message that they're just like, that's absurd. So I think this article does a good job of explaining like how that actually happened to wealthy people in the Great Depression. Specifically the author's family and how it could happen again. How basically the whole system is set up. Anyways, I'll shut up in a second here, but I just have to say, Niko, you absolutely nailed it on the culture stuff. I think this is the hit. Like this is where we need to focus our energy and understand that it's short-term urgency, long-term patience. It's a multi-generational project. And that's okay. Like I think it's okay to like be pushing and have like this desire to build. But it's like Bitcoin, we realize as we get into Bitcoin that it's way bigger than us, right? Like it's much more about the next generation and the people that are going to be living either in fiat slavery or potentially the opposite, the beautiful orange future. So yeah, that's all I had to say. Bitcoiners think bigger than themselves. And even though fiat has a 100-year head start on us, like we are going to win.
100%. I would say look, like the way that I see it is like ultimately like what we have on our side is like ultimately Bitcoin is a monetary system that incentivizes people to join, right? And it has this alignment of incentives where basically the miners out of pursuit of profit are mining, but in the process they're, securing the network. The people that are running nodes, right, out of, their incentive to like not trust someone else's copy of the blockchain, they run their own node, right? The people that are holding Bitcoin, again, you want to prophesize Bitcoin because you want other people, to buy Bitcoin ultimately. You want other people to start benefiting from the same benefit that you're having, right? The system that we're up against is a system that's based on coercion, right? And if you look at throughout history, there's so many examples, right? Like for example, like did you see people jumping from West Berlin, which was like, the non-communist side, to East Berlin? No, you saw people jumping from East Berlin, risking their lives to get to West Berlin because they wanted freedom, right? You look at Cuba, like I live in Miami. Do you see people taking rafts from Miami to Cuba? No, they take planes, right? But you see people taking rafts from Cuba to Miami, right? Because they want freedom. So my money is always on a system that attracts people based on the incentive rather than trying to coerce people into using that very said system. And that's exactly what the fiat monetary system is. It's basically like the government is coming in, they're forcing you to use a specific money. If you don't use that specific money, they'll lock you in a box, right? What do you think's going to win in the long term? The system that's based on incentives. So my money's on Bitcoin because ultimately it's a system based on incentives. We saw a great example of this, which I would make the argument cut the 2021 bull market short, where essentially 50% of the Bitcoin hash rate disappeared off the face of the planet because the Chinese Communist Party decided to ban Bitcoin mining within their borders. What was the end result of that? Within 9 months, the Bitcoin hash rate recovered. It decentralized in the process. And all of that happened without any single entity or centralized authority telling Bitcoin miners to, hey, plug those miners back in because, you got to do this because no. Those Bitcoin miners are like, wait, holy shit, 50% of the hash rate just dropped. That means I can make 50% more money, right? So this is why I'm so bullish on Bitcoin, is that ultimately it's a system based on incentives, right? And incentives are always going to win over coercion. All they have is coercion. What we have is incentives, right? And ultimately incentives win. And the other thing that I'll say is like kind of like that long-term thinking aspect of thing. They used to build cathedrals that would take like 800 years to build, meaning the first people that started building those cathedrals knew for a fact that by the time they died, for natural causes or whatever, they were never going to see that cathedral completed, right? But they still felt like they had the urge, they had that necessity to like construct something that was going to outlive them, that was going to be bigger than themselves, right? And this is something that I see with Bitcoiners. And fundamentally, what it comes down to is you guys have to understand that if someone is on a fiat mentality, I call it the fiat operating system, inherently that brings nihilism, inherently that brings short-term thinking, and that affects every asset of society, every facet of society. So whether it's the construction of buildings, right, you can see that things don't last as long as they used to. Whether that's food, right, again, food is worse than it used to be, right? It's all this short-term thinking that, again, is being incentivized by the fiat system, right? If you look at the Bitcoin operating system, it's this operating system of hope. It's this operating system of long-term thinking, because all of a sudden you do see the light at the end of the tunnel. You do see a better opportunity for you and your family. And you might not even see it for yourself. You might say like, look, like I don't have the revenue, I don't have the cash flow for I don't think I'm going to be able to, retire off my Bitcoin stack, but I know for a fact that once I pass it on to my kids, and Bitcoin's trading at $10 million a coin, whether that takes, 20 years or 30 years or 40 years, oh my God, my kids are going to be in a much better place, right? So again, you have to look at it. It's like multifaceted. You have to look at it from like different dimensions. Like ultimately, Bitcoin is incentive driven, right? The whole protocol is. And then the other facet is Bitcoin incentivizes long-term behavior and long-term thinking, right? So what are we up against? We're up against short-term thinking, and we're up against a coercive system. If I were to put my money on something, again, no pun intended, I'm always going to put my money on the incentive-based system, because that's how humans operate. Humans operate, I think it's American Hotto who coined this. I'm not going to take credit for this, but he says that no one is better than their incentives. And that's the beauty of Bitcoin. All of us talking right now, Max Kaiser coined the term, right? Which is who's the Bitcoin employee of the month, right? Sometimes it was Larry Fink. Who could have thought 5 years ago that Larry Fink would be pumping our bags? We would never have thought of that in a million years. Who could have thought that the president of the United States was going to tweet from the White House account, hey, we're going to make the United States the Bitcoin capital of the world? You would have never have imagined that. Do you think Larry Fink is orange pilled? Do you think Donald Trump is like, oh my God, yeah, I read the Bitcoin standard, this is going to fix everything? No. You know what they were all attracted to? They were attracted to number go up technology. Bitcoin has weaponized human greed in order to ensure its survival and in order to ensure its propagation. And that's exactly what we're witnessing here. I think what we underestimated a little bit was, I think we had this utopian vision that this was all going to happen a lot sooner than we thought. And it's not playing out that way. Right now, Bitcoin is up against, I would say, the second final boss. Bitcoin right now is dealing with Wall Street. And Wall Street fundamentally believes it could co-opt Bitcoin. It could harness Bitcoin. What Wall Street doesn't understand is that you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. And also, the final boss, I would say, are central banks and governments. And they have the same perspective. hey, listen, we're just going to co-opt Bitcoin. We're going to benefit from number go up technology. But what they fundamentally don't understand is that number go up technology and freedom go up technology are inextricably linked. You cannot disconnect the two. So once you let that Bitcoin Trojan horse through the gates, oh man, Bitcoin's going to take care of the rest.
Nico, you tied together a couple of threads there. Larry Fink and Wall Street's surprise embrace of Bitcoin, kind of pumping our bag, so to say, but also the decline in self custody that we've seen since they've entered the space. Bringing on this flood of Bitcoin ETFs, and now we're even seeing various other financial products that based off of Bitcoin that generate yield beyond STRC. We have them up here in Canada. I've seen SATA and variety of different ETFs that are more than just kind of like, hey, hold this, and you're holding a paper version of Bitcoin. So as that starts to happen, I'm saying this in the context of most of us Bitcoiners kind of know that Bitcoin is this Trojan horse, that it is going to kind of end up becoming the replacement or the demise of not maybe necessarily banking entirely, but at least banking as we currently know it. So when that starts to happen, when the banks have that realization, what starts to happen then? And I'm saying this in context of kind of the Iran war, but also kind of generally. And the reason I mentioned the Iran war is because recently Iran passed the secure digital insurance for maritime cargo with Bitcoin. So the Hormuz safe insurance kind of policy. And they're looking to use Bitcoin for this because obviously it is uncensorable. It cannot be stopped by such as the U.S. government. So is this going to be the kind of event, or is there an event like this that could occur where it might force Larry Fink and the bank bros to kind of pump the brakes a little bit on their embrace of Bitcoin, or are they going to remain full steam ahead?
So that's a great question. So I think fundamentally the Iran thing is a great example, right? And I called this too, when it was going to happen. As soon as I saw that news, I'm like, oh boy, Elizabeth Warren is going to run with this like crazy, right? And what did she do? The Senate Banking Committee, when they were discussing the Clarity Act, she said, Iran is now using Bitcoin, to take money for their passage. It's like, obviously, and you want to know why they're using Bitcoin? Because they know their currency is shit, number one. They know that they can't receive payments through the traditional banking system. What caused that in the first place? I could tell you what caused that in the first place. It was literally the weaponization of the United States dollar. How did that happen? That started with the Ukraine and Russia conflict, right? What happened in the Ukraine and Russia conflict? You know what the United States did? Hey, anyone who's from Russia, even if you're not connected to the government, you now don't have access to US dollars. Do you think those people are going to go, even if they end the sanctions, even if they say, oh, you know what, we changed our mind, we were wrong, you guys can get your assets back? Do you think that they're going to come back and say, you know what, we could trust that system? Hell no. That's a one-way door. The Iranians, they're thinking the same thing. And I think this is going to be a very hard pill to swallow. And I think it was Jeff Booth that originally said this. One of the things about Bitcoin that you have to get used to is that you have to get used to the fact that even your worst enemies are not only going to use Bitcoin, but they're going to benefit from Bitcoin just as much as you are. And that's the beauty of it, right? So again, if the United States decided not to weaponize the dollar like they but better said, instead of weaponize, let me use the word politicize. If the United States decided not to politicize the dollar like they did, then you know what? Guess what? Iran would have been like, yeah, just send me dollars. Look, governments could stop the adoption of Bitcoin tomorrow. All they have to do is stop censoring and stop printing. My question to you guys is, do you think they're going to do that? Absolutely not in a million years, because they can't help themselves, right? So, with Larry Fink and with, all these institutions kind of getting in and launching derivative products and launching products on top of Bitcoin, yeah, it's going to be attractive to particular types of investors. But ultimately, what they're really taking advantage of, anyone who's launching like a product on top of Bitcoin, what they're really taking advantage of is information asymmetry, right? Because the people that actually know Bitcoin, the people that actually know that Bitcoin is a bearer asset, the people that actually know that there is a way to take self-custody, especially with large amounts, using leveraging multi-sig and being smart about it, going down that rabbit hole, they're going to be like, wait a second, why am I buying the ETF and buying and essentially paying a yearly fee, right? Like, what is the point of that? And also, like the stretch product, it's a great product, right? You know, Michael Saylor is basically taking away the volatility from you, saying, listen, you might not get the upside that you want. We'll protect you from the downside, but hey, you know what? My base case is that Bitcoin's going to have a 30 to 20% CAGR for the next 20 years. I'm going to take away the downside for you. I'm going to take the upside from you. I'm going to take away from that, but I'm going to promise you, 11% yearly return on our product. I think it's 11.5% on the stretch product, right? So, like, again, why would someone sign up for that if you know that Bitcoin is going to give a 20 to 30% yearly return for the next 20 years? People wouldn't sign up for that, right? So again, like, all these institutions, all the Wall Street, what they're really doing is that they're taking advantage of the information asymmetry. Once people realize the potential of Bitcoin, the power that Bitcoin gives you once you take it into self-custody, I think all of these products, like, again, a lot of people are just going to be like, that kind of doesn't really make sense. I'd rather just hold it in spot. But as I said in the beginning of the conversation, to kind of weave all this back in, again, this is going to be a multi-generational process that is going to it's going to require moving that cultural needle. It's going to require the normalization of self-custody, right? Because right now, whether we like it or not, right now we're kind of talking in a bubble. Like, for us, taking self-custody is not crazy. Like, it's like, obvious, duh. Like why else would I do it in a different way? But you have to understand, you have to put your mindset into people that grew up within the traditional financial system, right? You talk to them about self-custody, they'll literally look at you like you're a crazy person, right? You're like, oh, this is money outside the system. Like, this is crazy, right? For us Bitcoiners, you're like, this is like the only way to do it, right? So you have to kind of have empathy and you have to meet people where they are. But again, as I said, as the generations go by and as people see the benefits, it's a one-way door. And, Larry Lepard wrote a book about this. Lynn Alden has the famous meme, nothing stops this train. Like, governments are not going to have a choice but to print. And if governments print, what do you think happens to Bitcoin? It's infinity divided by 21 million. Number goes up. The only way governments could actually really, really stop, they can try to coerce, they can try to jail us, they can try to whatever. The only way that governments are actually going to create a situation where people are going to say, you know what, this thing isn't really actually that useful, is if they stop printing and they stop censoring. And I don't see that in a million years. Why? Because it just comes with too much power. And again, like, what I think they fundamentally don't understand is they've been used to operating in a world where they've had a total monopoly on money. And now, to use Hayek's quote, Bitcoin has found a clear roundabout way to exist, right, without government's ability to shut it down, right? So it's a really exciting time. Again, it's a pivotal moment in human history. It's extremely exciting. There's going to be ups and downs, but I think fundamentally we're going to win. And we're going to win for one reason only, because we have incentives on our side and they have coercion. My money's always going to be on incentives.
I agree with you, especially as a Bitcoiner. Like, I love the sentiment around the positive incentives on Bitcoin and why you should hold, truly self-sovereign money and, unfuckable money, right? But I think, unfortunately, the path to get there is going to be hard. Like we said, most people, so, the two major blocks for most people into buying Bitcoin, one is obviously understanding, like, why do I need this asset, especially in the first world? And then the second is, like we said, convenience. And so in order to push people from, or you could say pull people from the fiat to the Bitcoin world, you not only need attractive forces, meaning like, oh, okay, here's the big print, here's the broken money book, here's the Bitcoin standard, here's why you should own this. This is so much better than your gold in your portfolio or your silver miner stocks or whatever else you have that you think is an inflation hedge. But unfortunately, the incumbent system is sticky, right? It benefits from network effects and from Lindy effects. People are mostly using it just because it's all they know and they think it's going to keep perpetuating itself because it has perpetuated itself for their entire lifetime. And so because of those two psychological, endpoints that are stuck in their brain, their assumption is always that they're just going to continue to use and benefit from this incumbent fiat system. And so to push them off of that, not only do we need the attractive properties of Bitcoin to be advertised and maximalized, right? But we need to see the negative impacts. So like, for example, FTX failed, Three Arrows Capital, Celsius. I know several people who had significant funds in one or two of those. And I cannot tell you how much more of a proponent they are for self-custody after losing several Bitcoin in Celsius or FTX than they are now. So that negative experience, right, basically reshaped their entire worldview around custody and made them ardent self-custodians. But it unfortunately took the pain of them losing Bitcoin. One of them lost, I think, over 5 Bitcoin, so a significant amount, right? It was his life savings. And so as we move forward, like, I know this sounds dark, but honestly, I think one of the best things to happen for self-custody is if Coinbase fails or if one of the major custodians fail, because that will be the only thing that will be able to nail home the point of why you buy Bitcoin as self-sovereign money and why you do not custody it. Is that financial pain of losing your Bitcoin and then realizing, oh shit, why am I buying something that is self-sovereign and then storing it with a third party that I don't even know and can't audit and I can't trust, right? I have to trust intermediaries, the government, a regulator, a financial agency, a third party, KPMG or one of the big 4 accounting firms. I have to trust them that they're doing their job right and they're not lying like they have multiple times before. And the second thing is, and I've been thinking about this for a while, right? Is the convenience aspect, right? Like, people want like the stupid option. People want the seamless option. People want to be able to, just like with NFC on your phone, like how I'm able to double tap my power button on my iPhone and pay with a credit card and tap it anywhere. If I go to Chick-fil-A or if I go, see a movie, I can just tap my phone and it pays via my credit card. People want those options. And I know that I think it's Callie, however you say his name, Calle. He was on Marty Ben a while ago talking about how he's building NFC lightning payments, so you can just tap your phone or tap a card and it will like digitally pay a lightning invoice without having like, your phone on or a lightning wallet open, which is sick. Like, that would be amazing. But we need more things like that, right? We need to get to the point where literally your Bitcoin wallet and your Bitcoin balance is basically indistinguishable from Venmo or PayPal or Stripe or whatever other like mainstream payment processor that people use, right? We need to get it so ubiquitous and so seamless that someone just is like, oh, I just download this app and then I can receive money and pay money. And the 12-word seed phrase is stored on, some cryptographic key on my phone. And there's just a backup. I just press, forgot my seed phrase, press back up, put in PIN number or put in, thumbprint or whatever, and it works. Like, people need, unfortunately, that kind of like stupid foolproof option with the most ease of convenience in order for them to adopt it. But I wish it wasn't that way, but I think that's those are the two main things that's going to stop people going forward from using Bitcoin. And there's one other thing I'll say, which is, I think Bitcoin is going to go through this evolutionary cycle as a form of money. It's going to take obviously decades, and obviously, like we said, a lot longer than people think. But the progression is, it first has to be store of value, then it can become a medium of exchange, and then it is a unit of count. And it's in that order, and each one of them takes a long time to prove out. So right now, we're still in the store of value phase. And I've talked to a lot of Bitcoin entrepreneurs. I've talked to quite a few people trying to work on merchant adoption, especially when I lived in Colombia. And one guy was this guy who was trying to develop basically like a network of Bitcoin merchants in rural Colombia. and he was using a couple, popular Lightning infrastructure providers to do so, right? And I had a couple long conversations with him, and my concern was, look, dude, like, first, Bitcoin is extremely early, and second, you're working against Gresham's law, which is, the idea that bad money drives out good. If you have two different currencies, you have the US dollar and then you have Bitcoin, and the US dollar is losing 2 to 4% a year and Bitcoin's gaining 20% a year, why would anyone spend their Bitcoin? They don't want to. So that headwind makes it difficult for even native Bitcoiners to go and want to spend. Obviously we have diehard Bitcoiners who love spending their Bitcoin. I like spending my Bitcoin. I just actually bought, some stuff at an auction. I've sold stuff for Bitcoin. Like, it's amazing. But the issue is, like, at a root level, like the average, think of like an average person getting into Bitcoin, becoming a new user, they would, once they grok the idea of, okay, Bitcoin's going to go up forever, my fiat money is going to go down forever, until Bitcoin reaches, asset maturity, which could be, 20 trillion, 50 trillion, 100 trillion market cap, right? Whatever it is, where it stabilizes totally. Like, they're going to wait until then to fully spend their Bitcoin, in my opinion, unless you see some sort of like hyperinflation event or some like complete fiat collapse, right? In that case, then yes, everyone's going to move to Bitcoin very quickly because there's not many other options. But until then, like, Bitcoin's going to go up every single year, and their fiat's going to slowly melt, and they're going to say, hey man, I would love to earn in Bitcoin. I'd love to get Bitcoin, deposited to an address. I'd love to buy Bitcoin, but I never want to spend it. I never want to sell it. Why would I do that? Like, it makes more sense for me to even borrow to buy more Bitcoin than it does to sell this appreciating asset and to buy something like a car or a house or, stocks or food or whatever. Like, everything else is below the hurdle rate of Bitcoin. And I think that is going to be a much bigger hurdle to cross than most people think, especially as we approach, medium of exchange and broad adoption. It's not going to be easy to convince most people to spend an asset that's going up in value continually. That's just
I agree 100% with you, Peruvian Bull. I'm sorry, man. I can't call you Roberto. I know you as Peruvian Bull, so I'm gonna keep calling you Peruvian Bull.
No, that is my true my OG name on here. And honestly, I've thought about going back. I don't know. People like the old name.
Dude, I still don't know Opti's real name. Okay, Opti to me is Opti, and there's people at Simply that, like, they work for me, whatever. I still don't know their real name. I'm lying. I do know their names, but I still call them by their anons, right? But Opti will always be Opti for me. Peruvian Bull, you'll always be Peruvian Bull for me, bro. But like, look, like, you bring up a really good point, and what I will say to that is, like, ultimately, like, and you even saw this with Michael Saylor, like, it was just a much more public thing. And, like, what am I referring to? So Michael Saylor went through the same, like, cycle that we have all gone through. He's just a much more public figure, and he has a lot more capital, and he's connected to the capital markets. But his thing was, like, you never sell your Bitcoin. Ladies and gentlemen, for the first 1 or 2 cycles, what did you say? Said never sell your Bitcoin. What ends up happening after you live through 1 or 2 cycles? You know what you end up doing? You end up selling some of your Bitcoin, right? So, like, I think that what we saw with this particular cycle, which wasn't a cycle that topped on euphoria, it was more so of a cycle that topped on apathy. We saw a lot of OGs cash out. And why did they cash out? Well, guys, these were people that were buying Bitcoin under $100, right? And now they're, standing on 100 million, 50 million, $1 billion worth of wealth that cost them maybe $10,000, $100,000 to acquire. And they're at a point in their lives right now where, again, they could have been extremely militant in their mid 20s, in their 30s. Now they're in their 40s. Now they're in their 50s, right? Their priorities have changed, right? They're like, look, I've held for 10 years. You know how hard it must have been to hold from $100. You know what that does to your psychology? You lose your mind, right? That volatility was not fun to shoulder through. Anyone that tells me, oh man, I wish I would have bought in 2013. It's like, dude, you would have sold, bro. Even if you bought at 2013, you would have seen Bitcoin go from $100 to 20K or $100 to 10K. You know what you would have been like, bro, I'm a genius. I'm going to sell, right? So like, what happens is, and like I've seen this, like personal experience, I've seen this with people, is you hold on to Bitcoin for a decade and dude, you have a totally different mentality. At that point, you're like, look, I've held this thing for a decade. Maybe I'm going to take a little bit off the top, or you can use these amazing services like, the Bitcoin collateralized loan services are great. Like Ledin is fantastic. Like, and again, you have to be responsible. You can't just go, put 50% of your stack or 100% of your stack into a Bitcoin collateralized loan. Cause again, you endanger yourself for getting margin called, but there's a way to do it responsibly where again, you could tap into the wealth of your Bitcoin without having necessarily to sell it, right? And then again, as time progresses, the amount of Bitcoin that you has as collateral, because it is a dollar loan, right? You're putting Bitcoin as collateral. That Bitcoin that you put up as collateral actually starts to go down over time, right? So there's many tools. There's a bunch of different entrepreneurs that are solving the problems, right? Of whether it's custody, whether it's how do you tap into your Bitcoin without having to sell it, like, and these products are just going to continue to mature. I'm a Peruvian Bull. I'm sure that, you mentioned Ledger earlier, bro, like in the early days, like there was no good hardware wallet solution. Like those companies were just getting started, right? So this space is going to continue to mature as time progresses. These solutions are going to continue to get better. And it's just going to become easier and easier for the user to interact with Bitcoin the right way, which is again in your custody. You're going to be able to transact with it on chain, and these solutions are just going to get easier and easier and easier, and they're just going to get more and more seamless as time progresses. And the incentive is there for entrepreneurs to actively solve these problems, right? Because ultimately they are problems, right? There are problems where it's like, look, like I just don't feel comfortable because like I just don't have the time to take the, to learn how to use a BitKey or to learn how to use another hardware wallet, right? I'm sorry, I just don't have the time to do that. As time progresses, these solutions are going to get better and better and better and better. And the incentive is there for entrepreneurs to build companies to solve these solutions, to solve these problems, better said.
Nico, I love it. Let me just jump in really quick because we were talking about spending Bitcoin, and this is a hill that I'll die on. I think as you grow up in Bitcoin, you start to realize that, I mean, as you move towards living on a Bitcoin standard, which is where I'm at, I live on zero fiat. So for me, it's economically in my best interest to have more places that I can spend my Bitcoin, right? We also don't know what the future holds. So if we're in a situation where you have to convert to fiat to access goods and services, in my opinion, Bitcoin has basically completely failed. Like that's just a centralized, controlled system. Basically, Bitcoin's just a store of value. So yeah, that's what I say. And then the other thing I say is like, hey, if you're a Bitcoiner, you're passionate, and you really think Bitcoin's going to be like a global money one day, then you need to use it to actually experience it so you can understand what that world might look like. So I just highly encourage people. It doesn't have to be much. It's spend and replace. It's not deplete your stack or spend your savings. It's just support the businesses that you want to see exist in the future. Small businesses, it's like such a hard grind. But if you send them, if you're paying them in Bitcoin and you know they're storing it in Bitcoin, you have a higher chance of that business existing in the future. So that's what I say is like use it, spend and replace, and support the businesses that you want to see exist.
Absolutely. The Bitcoin Well team, thank you guys so much for having me. I have to run to a dinner. I really appreciate it. This was a fantastic space. Thank you guys so much for inviting me today.
Thank you so much, Nico, for coming on, man. Yeah, and
Nico, thanks for coming on, man. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, and Kyle, I'm right there with you, brother. Like I live on the Bitcoin standard already. Like I convert to fiat as needed to pay bills, but like Bitcoin is my money. Like I feel like I'm going to another country whenever I use my money. I'm like, all right, let's convert to the local currency and do what I need to do, or I pay directly in Bitcoin if possible. But yes, I wanted to touch on something Nico said earlier because it made me realize that like one of Bitcoin's biggest weaknesses is actually like a superpower. Like, because like what's the most frustrating thing about Bitcoin is that people don't understand it. And we're trying to explain what Bitcoin is to people. But the fact that people don't understand it is how Wall Street and governments are going to be promoting Bitcoin and spreading Bitcoin to people, not realizing what the hell they're actually doing is spreading freedom money like all over the world, because they're just doing it, like I said, for the pumping to pump their own bags for money go up technology. But it's like, you know, even Coinbase, like what is the worst thing that happened with Coinbase is they can collapse as a company and take a bunch of people's Bitcoin with them. Like all that does is spread awareness through the pain, you know, and Bitcoin will keep going, you know, regardless of the temporary crash that would happen. But people would realize that like, oh, what, Bitcoin's still going even though this giant exchange crash, and I thought it would be dead by now, you know. But yeah, like Nico said, once the cat is out of the bag, it's not going back in, you know. Just like Iran and Russia, they're not, once they get off of Swift and start using something like Bitcoin, they're not going to want to go back to Swift, you know. Even if they're allowed back onto Swift, they're going to keep other options in the back foot, you know, so that they can pivot to something like Bitcoin. And it just gives even more phrase, like power to the phrase like Bitcoin is for enemies, because it's not even something you have to do like begrudgingly, like, oh yeah, my enemies are gonna use it, dang it. But like, you know, your enemies are actually spreading freedom whether they know it or not, like by using Bitcoin and selling people on Bitcoin. Like, and that's what Wall Street does best, is like sell shit to people. So they're going to be selling Bitcoin, they're going to be selling freedom, not even knowing what they're doing. So to me, that gives me a lot of hope for like what is happening, you know, with people complaining about strategy and Saylor. It's like it doesn't matter what they're doing, they're spreading Bitcoin one way or the other, you know. Even if it ends badly for them, it doesn't matter, because in the end Bitcoin's just going to keep pumping out blocks and keep moving along. So
Yeah, true. And the other thing I would add, Nico was saying that, we've only started weaponizing the dollar or whatever in 2022. The history is actually a lot darker than that. We've been doing this since the 70s, really. And you could even argue we did it earlier in the, price fixing days of Bretton Woods, pressuring countries to defend their pegs, even when it was disadvantageous to them and advantageous to us. But ever since the establishment of SWIFT in the mid 1970s in Switzerland, the international banking system was supposed to be this, like, I guess you could say, like supranational, completely ambivalent, third party, neutral arbiter of global finance, right? It was supposed to be this basically opinionless transactor, and it wouldn't, and couldn't make proclamations on, political or economic or, moral correctness, right? And what's happened over the last 50 years is the proving of that being false, right? The U.S., the Treasury, but also the Fed, and through their correspondent banking networks, have undue influence on the SWIFT system, which is proven in that, not only does SWIFT ban and basically censor countries, and especially, individuals, wealthy individuals that don't have a UN resolution against them or don't have a broad-based, any sort of embargo or trade block against them. But even some that are explicitly allowed to do business by other countries are banned via SWIFT and via the Treasury's OFAC office, which is the Office of Foreign Assets Control. They've been using since, especially the 90s, but it's been happening increasingly since the mid 2000s. They've been using Section 301 of the U.S. Patriot Act to censor and to monitor and to freeze people's bank accounts if they are acting in against the interests of the United States. So, and again, that's a vague statement. Like, what's the interest of the United States, and how do you determine if someone's acting against that? Well, that's kind of left convoluted, right? No one really knows. But yeah, this has been happening for years. I mean, in 2014, there was a French bank that Societe Generale, which is one of the largest banks in France, that was doing a loan to an Iranian bank based oil refiner, and they needed this money to help expand one of their refining plants. And OFAC, the Treasury sub office, blocked it, and they threatened a $1 billion fine if the French bank went through it. Now, the French bank is not under the U.S. jurisdiction, but they got blocked from doing it, and they had to pay a fine to Treasury in order to, clear their name over just daring to like throw stones right at the Imperial Garden at the U.S. And so, yeah, the U.S. has had this lever for years, and there's several books written about it. The best one, I think, is Treasury's War by Juan Zarate. And Juan was one of the White House economic advisors under, I believe it was Obama, and then he was Undersecretary of the Treasury also under Obama. And so he was key in creating and managing these strategies of financial warfare. But the issue is not that, that they're doing this now, it's that they can do this at all, right? And of course, once you give humans undue influence or the ability to leverage power against other people, they're going to use it eventually. Even if you have the most moral or upstanding people in power, eventually those people die or they move on or they retire, and then not so moral and not so upstanding people take control, and those people decide to abuse it. So yeah, this has been happening for years. It's not just something as simple as SWIFT banning. It gets much more complex into the Patriot Act, into foreign asset surveillance via OFAC, into Section 301. Yeah, there's an entire network of you could say like financial warfare that's been built on top of the US dollar. And by banning countries or individual banks from using correspondent banks in the US, it basically makes it impossible for a foreign bank to settle US dollar-based transactions, because you need to have a foreign bank or a domestic US bank, you could say, to have a branch in the US or have a correspondent that has a branch in the US to transact US dollars properly through the Fedwire system, right? Either in bank reserve form or in direct debit or credit form between bank branches. So if you don't have that, this is the weapon that Treasury uses, if you're able to ban people from using correspondent banks, then you're able to basically ban them from using the US dollar entirely, which is what they've done to Iran, what they've done to North Korea, what they've done to Russia. And it's something that they're going to continue to abuse until the system itself ends, right? Because it doesn't make any sense to do anything else. Once you have this lever of power, you're going to keep pulling it.
Can I ask, do you guys actually think that Wall Street is promoting Bitcoin as freedom money? That seems pretty ridiculous.
No, I wasn't
don't.
saying that they would actually promote it as freedom money, but by promoting it, they are spreading freedom money, whether they know it or not. It's kind of like a Trojan horse type situation.
I got you. That makes sense. Yeah, I tend to, see, even look at Michael Saylor, right? He says the dollar doesn't compete, Bitcoin doesn't compete with the dollar. We all know Michael Saylor's intelligent enough to know that's not true. So yeah, going back to Niko's thing about incentives, right? Wall Street's incentives are not aligned with human freedom. So I have a hard time thinking that, yes, it's like the gateway drug is the ETF. Oh, once you're in the ETF, maybe you'll go further, but I'm not convinced that pipeline really works that well. I think people kind of just kind of basically forego all their responsibility to Wall Street. So I don't know, just thinking about that.
Yeah, and then there's also the side of are they just creating paper Bitcoin with all these ETF products, right? I think Kyle, you and I have had the conversation before that one of my concerns with strategy and with a lot of these treasury companies is just the amount of derivatives you're building on top of a single underlying, asset, right? You're not only creating an equity that is supposedly leveraged to Bitcoin, you're also creating convertible debt, you're creating preferreds, you're creating there's 2 leveraged ETFs on strategy. I think it's STRU, and then there's another one. In February, BlackRock filed for a leveraged options ETF on strategy as well. And so that's going to be another derivative that's based purely on monetizing, strategy volatility based off of Bitcoin volatility. So it's like rehypothecation after rehypothecation, directing demand away from the fundamental asset, which is Bitcoin. And again, I'm not saying that it's bad to own the stock. If you want to speculate on strategy, go ahead. If you want to play call options, go ahead. I get it. This is trading. This is how the game is played. But it's a fundamental different thing to do. Is owning stocks or owning an ETF or owning call options than it is to actually buy and hold Bitcoin. Like those are two different things, and they should never be treated as, one and the same, which is what I think a lot of Wall Street wants to market it as.
And I'm also watching Wall Street really, the traditional finance in general really is more fan of ossification than upgrading Bitcoin. I wonder if you guys have any thoughts on that.
What do you mean by that?
Just basically like Michael Saylor, these guys, like they want Bitcoin to remain. This is my perspective on it. You guys tell me if this makes sense. But Bitcoin as a medium of exchange is freedom money. That's what actually threatens the current fiat system, right? That's why they want to know all of our financial transactions, control the on and off ramp. So what do Bitcoin proposals, many of them do? They add functionality to Bitcoin, which allows for more user experience and, more use cases, I guess you could say. So some might argue, I could kind of understand this perspective that like, if you are Wall Street, if you're traditional finance, you don't want Bitcoin to become a medium of exchange. You're happy with it as it is. And it's so risky to upgrade Bitcoin. But if you understand, I'm not a technical guy, but Bitcoin does need to be upgraded. There's a bug that at some point there will be a hard fork. There will be upgrades to Bitcoin. And I see traditional finance kind of pushing against that. So I'm just curious if you guys have thought about that at all.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, I think that's probably one of the biggest risks of TradFi and of this whole ecosystem in general is them getting more and more involved on trying to decide right where Bitcoin leads, because now they have financial incentive and they're going to want to manage, you could say, the Bitcoin evolution that to serve their interests and their clients' interests, obviously. I think isn't it like there's only like 3 mining pools that control like 60% of all hash rate or something like that. And I know I think it's JP Morgan or BlackRock has made some investments in some of the largest mining pools. I don't remember which ones they were, but yeah, like it's definitely concerning. And obviously with the Epstein files, you saw that there was release of information showing that some of the largest financial institutions funded the early Bitcoin. What is it called? That it was that organization that funded most of the early Bitcoin devs. I forgot the name.
Blockstream?
No, well, Blockstream was one of the companies, but there was like it's called like the Bitcoin. I'm blanking on it now, dude. It's not Bitcoin Corporation. It's like
It's like
Bitcoin
foundation.
Foundation. Yeah, that's it.
Foundry. It's Foundry.
Foundry. Okay. But yeah, no. So like that does concern me as to like the actual improvements that need to be made to Bitcoin. I know that's a very hot spot of contention, especially the war between corn and knots right now. I'm of the opinion that, even if things are that people consider them spammy, that censoring things on Bitcoin inevitably leads to more censorship, and it's going to be very hard to determine like what's valid, what's not. I'm always the route of less censorship, not more, especially with regards to Bitcoin, because we already have a censored system. So if people want to stay in the censored system, I think they already have that option. So that's my 2 cents on it. But hey, Dr. Detroit, thanks for coming on. I invited you up. I saw you request earlier, and then I tried to get you back up here.
Yeah, no, I was just hearing you guys talk about just everything, and it's interesting what you guys are talking about, and about the Wall Street and people wanting to self-custody. I don't think that they're handling anything correctly. I mean, the amount of, at the end of the day, what happens at the end of every day, who has what and all of these. I just don't understand how that works, but I don't know. I'm just chiming in on.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say about that.
Yeah, thanks for coming up. Yeah, no, it's like this is the issue is that not only has Strategy not released proof of reserves, right? But as far as I know, most of the major custodians don't really allow public third-party audits. I do believe that Fidelity has done third-party audits, but from what I understand, like their audits are released, like their audit papers are released to the regulator and privately. I don't know if they're publicly audited. But even if they are, like there's also
I think they mine too. I think they have some type of mining setup, a small, or they used to, or they've been doing that for a while, is my understanding. So they're as far as I know, is they're ahead of the game as far as understanding how Bitcoin works and all that than the other guys.
Oh,
That's what I've heard.
yeah, they definitely are. Yeah, no, I'm just looking it up now. I remember, so this was what I was talking about earlier. So Digital Currency Group, DCG, controls Foundry USA, which is 30 to 34% of the global Bitcoin hash rate. And it's heavily backed by Wall Street firms, including, let me look it up again. JP Morgan, State Street. Yeah, like, so a lot of the big boys, right? And that's, to me, that's honestly more worrying than like even the ETFs, because like the ETFs are just like paper Bitcoin that's distracting people, and they can rehypothecate it, but actually controlling mining hash rate, obviously, even though it's not a majority, and even if they do have a majority, yes, I know that there's a balance between the nodes and the miners, and even a simple majority of miners can't pass things, sure, but
Foundry kills it. I mean, they
yeah.
take it down. They get more blocks than anybody. Them and Ampool pretty much. They be shooting themselves in their own foot. They're not going to mess it up. You know, you're right. There's only a few, and they're getting all the blocks. You know, they're getting majority of the blocks, and they're just sharing. They can all eat at the same dinner table. They know what's going on. They talk to each other. It's either Ampool has all these other pools that, you know, they're not calling Ampool, but, you know, I mine with I can't even think of Lincoin, and they're a part of Ampool, and they have less. I think they have like 4 exahash last time I checked a long time ago, but they had the same amount of hash rate as Ocean, and they were a PPS pool, like a pay per share, and it just didn't make sense to me. Like Ocean was hitting not many blocks, and they were just paying out, you know. So once they started opening the hood on and explaining how who had what hash rate, and seeing how quick the blocks, what kind of hash rate you had to have to get blocks to come in, it was pretty interesting to see how many pools that will pay people that don't have quite the hash rate you think they'd have. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, but you know, I would say that they don't necessarily, you know, have to have, you could say, like malicious intentions to manipulate Bitcoin to have a material impact, right? Like here's an example of like what could be a Wall Street playbook, right? You run Foundry, you own 34% of the hash rate. You also own 7 ETFs, right? Or you have partnerships with 7 different ETFs. And at the end of different financial reporting quarters, each ETF needs to report X amount of Bitcoin, like 300,000 or 500,000 or 800,000 or whatever. You could just play this rehypothecation daisy chain game, which is what banks already do, by the way, in the overnight lending markets and repo. They do what's called window dressing, which is where they'll take bad debt off their balance sheet, they'll loan it out, they'll take on loans for using treasuries as collateral. They'll try to get good capital in like 2 or 3 days right before the end of a quarter. And then when they're actually having their audit done at the quarter end, their balance sheet looks a lot healthier than when it normally does. And you can do the same thing with ETFs, right? As far as I know, a lot of the ETF requirements reporting are, you know, monthly or quarterly. And so at end of month, end of quarter, you could move Bitcoins around to make sure that, oh, our one ETF has enough Bitcoin. Okay, then we're going to shift 200K Bitcoin over to this other one so that it has enough by the end of its financial reporting window. And you can just keep doing that and make everyone buy ETF shares of these 7 Bitcoin ETFs or 10 Bitcoin ETFs and not ever have all of the Bitcoin that is supposed to be there. And that's, I guess, one of my major concerns with paper Bitcoin and Wall Street getting involved.
Amen. Yeah, that's not supposed to happen. As far as what I heard that was not supposed to be the gig, you know. Of course, that's what they're going to say, but we all know that it's almost impossible for them to keep up track. That's what I meant. That's what I was getting at.
Yeah, the way I see it is like Bitcoin is just more transparent. Like, let's say in fiat, compare fiat rehypothecation to Bitcoin rehypothecation. Roberto's spot on, is that these banks are going to hypothecate Bitcoin. Like, the temptation is there. The difference is that there's no bailouts, right? With Bitcoin, there's no FDIC insurance. So the banks are taking much more risk. If they do rehypothecate, this is just my optimism, maybe they won't go as aggressive. Maybe they won't go to 1% fractional reserve banking. Maybe they'll rehypothecate 10%. Because the minute that like we start adding up all these quarterly, end of quarter balance sheets, and there's 28 million Bitcoin, when it all adds up, like, it's not going to take a rocket scientist to start pointing fingers and figure out who's underwater. So I don't know. I think this is a really big concern, but at the same time, I kind of go back again to the incentives. Like, compared to what, right? Like, compared to fiat, compared to gold, like, how do you audit gold? You can't. We don't even know how much gold is in Fort Knox, obviously. We're always going to know how much Bitcoin there is and where it is. So just a 2 cents.
Yeah,
Well, and
totally
completely
agree.
like the fact is that we know that the fiat system is going to play fiat games. Like, that's what they're going to do 100%. And when they get a hold of Bitcoin, they're going to try and play fiat games with it. And I think that's kind of what we were talking about too before, with the fact that, like, they're going to blow up. Like, eventually they're not going to last forever because they are playing these scams and these games with it. But when they do blow up, that's gonna increase the awareness that the underlying asset is not the games that they're playing with it. Just like the crazy price appreciations we have seen in the past during the 4-year cycle, people associate, oh, that's Bitcoin. Bitcoin is unstable. It's this and that. Like, no, that's the fiat game playing games with Bitcoin, trying to pump money and trying to make money. Just like everything in Wall Street and the fiat system does. So I definitely think you're right, Kyle. Like, I definitely don't trust Wall Street, and that wasn't my point to say that I trust Wall Street. I just mean that they are spreading awareness about a product that, whether they know it or not, is fundamentally going to spread freedom. Like, at the end of the day, because we know that the fiat game is like a shell game that eventually collapses in on itself, and how that looks is going to be different when they're using Bitcoin. It might be more obvious because they're using Bitcoin, and like you say, it's on chain. We can look at what the underlying asset is doing versus what they're doing, and are able to call them out sooner, or spread the truth about what happened after the fact sooner, because we can see factually on chain what has happened and who had what Bitcoin at what point and who was completely lying. So I definitely think it's not a free lunch in that sense. Like, there will be pain, but I think that ultimately that kind of goes back to what we were saying at the top of the conversation, is like, how do normie people in America and Canada and other Western countries, like, that aren't seeing the pain of their money collapsing overnight, like people are in other countries, how do they come to the realization that, oh, holy shit, like, I need to actually own an asset that isn't controlled by the governments and can't be controlled by Wall Street and banks? Like, those are the kind of scenarios that'll happen that will probably shake a lot of people up and be like, oh, see, Bitcoin was a lie, just like everything else. But then Bitcoin just keeps functioning, and they're like, oh, well, I thought Bitcoin was dead because we had this giant Wall Street blow up and all these ETFs collapsed, and Bitcoin is still going to be there. It's still chugging along no matter what the price in the temporary looks like. But yeah, that was my main point there, and I'm sorry if I didn't explain that well enough earlier. And I wanted to say too, this wasn't to take a side in the core or knots debate either, but just you mentioned the ossification of Bitcoin, and I always just think of the Satoshi Nakamoto quote where he said, the nature of Bitcoin is such that once version 0.1 was released, the core design was set in stone for the rest of its lifetime. So I do think it's a battle between those sides, and I think the free market has to decide that, because it is open source technology. The people will decide it based on what they run and how they want the chain to work ultimately. But the core design of Bitcoin isn't going to change, because that's what it is at this point. And if it does change fundamentally, then it will be a different coin. But yeah, that's a whole other conversation. I didn't mean to derail there, but yeah, I know we're probably getting to the point where we want to wrap up, but if everyone wants to give maybe some final thoughts or something like that.
Yeah, I was about to say that, Zach. I gotta run to a dinner as well. Yeah, no, final thoughts is from the outset of the space, right? We all promote self-custody. We want to have, we want to have everyone use Bitcoin to its fullest extent and to actually take away, you know, sovereignty from the state by divesting their funds from the state. But the road there to get there is hard. And I think, unfortunately, like most people are not going to learn just via incentives and books and cool marketing, although that will get some people. I think a lot of people will have to learn the hard way. So they'll have to see inflation eat away the value of their earnings. They'll have to see their stocks go down in real terms, right? Maybe not nominally, but in real terms. They'll have to see their bonds collapse in value. They'll have to see a 6102 seize their funds and their accounts. They'll have to see a centralized exchange fail. They'll have to see all those things happen for them to finally realize that they need to own Bitcoin and own it non-custodially. So I think it's going to be a hard journey to get there, but I'm glad that we're already on the right side and we're already ahead of the curve. Everyone, or most people in this space, are probably ahead of the curve in owning Bitcoin and self-custodying it. So thanks for the spaces, man. And I'm excited to see how this system progresses moving forward.
Yeah, if you want to cut out the middleman and go straight to self-custody, that's what we do at Bitcoin Well. So definitely check us out if you've never heard of us. But that's our main mission, is to make people sovereign and put Bitcoin in their wallets, not to hold their Bitcoin, not to give them some counterparty risk that they now have to worry about. But yeah, Conrad, Kyle, and you two, Detroit, if you guys want to give a last thought before we wrap up here, go ahead.
I'm just worried, like the same thing you were saying, when these ETFs, how does anybody, I don't think it's going to spread the word of Bitcoin, but as far as like people, all the investors of these ETFs are not going to walk away with some Bitcoin in a wallet. I don't think, that's not going to happen. They're going to keep every single coin. These institutions are not going to give that up. Yeah, that's it.
Yep. Final words from me, guys. I just got back from Kenya, and the level of optimism and adoption there is just outrageous. I'm incredibly inspired. And June 10th, I'll be at the Unconference for My First Bitcoin in Prague, premiering that film. So if you happen to be in Prague for the conference, hit me up and I'll get you in there. And yeah, guys, thanks for having me on. You guys, Bitcoin Well is one of the companies that I look to as a company that does business with real values and at a significant cost. It would be easier for these guys to, say, hey, let us hold your coins for you. But they don't do that. You got to go straight to self-custody. And I think we just want to commend you guys for holding the line on that.
Thank you for that, Kyle. And thank you for coming on the spaces. Conrad, did you have something you want to say? Oh, I'm not hearing you, Conrad. You looks like you're unmuted, but I'm not hearing anything.
I can't hear him either.
Yeah, me neither.
Dang it.
Sorry, we'll go ahead and wrap up.
Yes. You probably had an amazing take, but yeah, thanks so much, guys. Have a good night.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Yeah, everyone in the audience, if you love Bitcoin films, check out Kyle Huber. He has great content, and he has a really cool podcast too called Are Satoshi. And then Bitcoin Well. If you want to buy Bitcoin in the US or Canada and self-custody it, please use Bitcoin Well, because it's the only non-custodial Bitcoin exchange. Everyone else wants to store your coins. This is the one that actually lets you hold them yourself.
I have not heard of you guys, so.
Hey, you guys still hear me?
Yeah, Conrad, you're back. Go ahead, man. Final words.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, first off, Roberto, Kyle, and Dr. Troy, thank you so much for coming on, guys. I love hearing your different perspectives on everything. Wow, Kyle, I can't wait to hear about your enthusiasm, Bitcoin's enthusiasm in Kenya. I feel like that could be a whole space on its own. I'm not going to be able to make it for Prague, unfortunately, but I would love to check out that My First Bitcoin video. Perfectly fits into to our theme here. I've been kind of thinking about, where are we in Bitcoin's kind of adoption timeline? I think that's kind of a theme of what we were talking about today, self-custody adoption, Wall Street adoption. And I kind of see those two things as actually being separate timelines almost. Like, we can even look at something like NVIDIA, where NVIDIA's valued at like $1 bajillion, but like AI is still like not a profitable business yet. Like a lot of these AI businesses are kind of underwater, and there's a lot of optimism built into that price. So it seems there's a bit of a divergence from like the used and the financial aspect of the thing. And with Bitcoin, that thing is the asset and kind of the network. And I feel like we're seeing a faster pace of adoption right now, of Bitcoin, the asset, thanks to kind of Wall Street's adoption, and the technology adoption is kind of a little bit stalled relative to the financial aspect. I feel like we're, Sailor talked about STRC being the iPhone. I would argue like we've barely even seen the Macintosh phase. So to Roberto's point, I think it was Roberto or Kyle that mentioned that we're still super early to the self-custody thing, and spreading out the education on self-custody is really going to be helping out for everybody that's ahead of the curve, behind the curve, because they're going to be finally getting ahead into self-custody at a time where it's still very, very early. So yeah, I appreciate everyone that's tuning in, and appreciate as well everyone that's self-custodying and helping spread the Bitcoin culture. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Conrad. And everyone have a great night. Thank you for tuning in, and go get some Bitcoin and put it in self-custody for God's sake. All right, everyone. Have a great night.
Have a good night, everyone.
Peace.